What if an entire region runs out of water overnight? In Crimea, experts warn a so-called zero-day may be approaching, putting millions at risk and triggering fears inside the Kremlin. This crisis is not just about water. It is about power, control, and the future of the Ukraine war. Stay with us, because what happens next could change everything. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we are discussing a developing situation that is raising serious alarms across Eastern Europe and beyond. Crimea, a region at the center of global tension since 2014, is now facing a severe water crisis that some analysts are calling a potential zero-day scenario. Zero-day refers to the moment when water supply systems can no longer meet basic human demand. According to multiple reports, reservoirs are shrinking, infrastructure is aging, and climate pressure is worsening an already fragile system. This crisis matters because water is not just a resource, it is a strategic weapon. Control over water can shape migration, military planning, and political stability. For Moscow, Crimea has always been symbolic, but symbolism alone cannot sustain millions of people. As water shortages grow, so do logistical and security challenges. Farmers are struggling, cities are rationing, and authorities are facing difficult decisions. This situation is unfolding quietly, but its implications are enormous. A humanitarian issue could quickly become a geopolitical flashpoint. Today's video will break down what zero-day really means, why Crimea is vulnerable, how this affects the wider war, and why many believe this is one of Vladimir Putin's deepest fears. Watch until the end to understand why water may decide the next phase of this conflict. To understand the seriousness of Crimea's water crisis, we must look at its geography and history. Crimea has limited natural freshwater sources and has long depended on external water supplies. For decades, most of its freshwater came through a canal system originating from mainland Ukraine. After 2014, that supply was cut, forcing the region to rely on reservoirs, groundwater, and emergency infrastructure. These alternatives were never designed to support the entire population long-term. Over time, overuse of groundwater caused salinization, making water unsafe for agriculture and human consumption. Climate change has added further pressure through reduced rainfall and higher evaporation rates. Population shifts and military expansion have increased demand even more. Each year, the gap between supply and demand has grown wider. Engineers can delay collapse, but they cannot create water from nothing. Desalination projects have been discussed, but they are expensive, slow, and energy-intensive. Meanwhile, pipelines and reservoirs continue to degrade. This is why experts warn of a zero-day scenario. It is not about panic, but math. When inflow consistently falls below consumption, the outcome becomes inevitable. Crimea's vulnerability is structural, not temporary. Without a major political or infrastructural change, water stress will continue to intensify. This is the foundation of the current crisis. The humanitarian impact of a water shortage on this scale cannot be overstated. Water affects every aspect of daily life, from drinking and cooking to sanitation and healthcare. Hospitals require clean water to function safely. Without it, infection risks rise dramatically. Schools, homes, and public services also depend on stable supply. When shortages begin, authorities often implement rationing, limiting access for ordinary citizens. This creates frustration, fear, and inequality. Wealthier households may find alternatives, while poorer communities suffer first. Agriculture is usually hit even harder. Crops fail, livestock numbers fall, and food prices rise. This puts additional pressure on families already struggling economically. Migration often follows water collapse. People move not because they want to, but because survival demands it. If millions are affected, displacement becomes a regional issue, not a local one. For governing authorities, managing public reaction becomes as critical as managing infrastructure. Protests, unrest, and declining trust are common consequences. In conflict zones, these risks multiply. Water shortages can weaken morale and reduce administrative control. This is why analysts describe the situation as more than a utility problem. It is a stability crisis. In Crimea, where political legitimacy is already contested internationally, a humanitarian breakdown would carry enormous consequences for everyone involved. From a strategic perspective, water scarcity directly affects military planning and security. Modern armed forces depend heavily on reliable logistics, and water is one of the most basic requirements. Bases, vehicles, and personnel all need consistent supply. If water becomes scarce, operational readiness declines. Resources must be diverted from combat roles to support functions. In Crimea, which hosts significant military assets, this is a serious concern. Any strain on logistics reduces flexibility and increases vulnerability. Additionally, civilian shortages can force authorities to prioritize military needs, further inflaming public resentment. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. Infrastructure protection also becomes more difficult as systems age and operate beyond capacity. Sabotage accidents or natural damage have greater impact when no backup exists. Strategists understand that water scarcity limits long-term control. Territory cannot be held indefinitely if basic survival needs are unmet. This is why water infrastructure has historically been targeted or defended in conflicts worldwide. In Crimea's case, the lack of secure freshwater sources remains a strategic weakness. Analysts argue that this vulnerability influences broader decision-making. It adds pressure to secure alternative routes, negotiate access, or escalate actions elsewhere. When water becomes a constraint, it quietly reshapes strategy. That is why this issue matters far beyond taps and reservoirs. Politically, the water crisis places leaders under intense pressure. For the Kremlin, Crimea has been presented as a success story, a symbol of strength and national pride. A visible humanitarian failure would challenge that narrative. Managing perception becomes as important as managing reality. State media may downplay shortages, but citizens experience daily life directly. Empty taps and ration schedules are difficult to hide. When expectations collide with lived reality, trust erodes. Internationally, the situation complicates diplomacy. Humanitarian concerns attract global attention and scrutiny. Aid discussions, sanctions debates, and legal arguments often follow. Opponents may frame the crisis as evidence of mismanagement, while supporters search for external blame. Internally, officials must balance resources between regions, which can create resentment elsewhere. Water shortages force hard choices, and every choice has political cost. Even technological solutions like desalination plants take years to build and require stable energy supplies. Short-term fixes rarely solve structural problems. This is why analysts describe the water issue as a slow-moving political threat. It does not explode instantly, but it steadily undermines credibility. Over time, the cost of maintaining control rises. For any government, especially one invested heavily in symbolism, this is deeply uncomfortable. Water scarcity turns governance into crisis management, and crisis management exposes weakness. The concept of zero-day deserves clear explanation. Zero-day does not mean every tap instantly runs dry. It refers to the point where demand consistently exceeds supply, forcing authorities to shut off water for large portions of the population. Cities may receive water only a few hours per day. Rural areas may lose access entirely. At this stage, emergency measures become permanent rather than temporary. Tanker trucks, bottled water distribution, and strict rationing replace normal systems. These measures are expensive, inefficient, and stressful. They also indicate systemic failure. Zero-day has occurred in other parts of the world, and recovery is difficult. Once groundwater is depleted or contaminated, restoration can take decades. Infrastructure damage by overuse often requires complete replacement. In Crimea, experts warn that approaching this threshold would represent a tipping point. The system could technically continue operating, but not at a level that supports normal life. This is why the term is so alarming. It signals loss of resilience. The closer a region moves toward zero-day, the fewer options remain. Prevention is always easier than recovery. However, prevention requires early action, transparency, and investment. When these elements are delayed or politicized, the window narrows. That is the danger analysts are highlighting today. International reactions to Crimea's water situation are cautious but attentive. Governments and organizations understand that water crises can destabilize entire regions. Public statements often focus on humanitarian principles, while avoiding direct escalation. Aid agencies monitor conditions closely, especially regarding public health risks. At the same time, legal and political complexities limit direct intervention. Sanctions, recognition disputes, and security concerns all play a role. This leaves civilians caught in the middle. Some analysts argue that water scarcity increases incentives for negotiation, while others warn it may encourage risk-taking. History offers examples of both outcomes. What is clear is that environmental stress rarely remains isolated. It interacts with economics, security, and politics simultaneously. For neighboring regions, population movement and economic disruption are real concerns. For global observers, Crimea represents a case study in how resource constraints affect modern conflicts. The issue also highlights the growing role of climate and infrastructure in geopolitics. Wars are no longer fought only with weapons, but with supply chains, utilities, and resilience. Water sits at the center of that equation. As awareness grows, so does debate over responsibility and solutions. However, debate alone does not fill reservoirs. Time remains the most critical factor. Looking ahead, several scenarios are possible. One option involves massive investment in infrastructure, including desalination and new pipelines. This would require time, energy, and sustained funding. Another scenario involves reduced population pressure through migration, whether voluntary or forced by circumstance. This carries social and political risks. A third possibility is negotiated access to external water sources, which would require political compromise. Each path carries costs. There is no easy solution. Delaying action increases risk, but acting decisively requires acknowledgement of the problem. Environmental trends suggest that water stress will intensify rather than fade. This makes long-term planning essential. Short-term fixes may ease headlines but fail to address fundamentals. Analysts emphasize that resilience comes from diversification of supply and reduction of demand. Efficiency, conservation, and transparent management are critical. Without them, even large projects can fail. The future of Crimea's water situation will depend on choices made now. These choices will shape not only daily life, but regional stability. Water may not dominate headlines like missiles or battles, but it quietly determines outcomes. In that sense, it may be one of the most powerful forces at work today. Public awareness plays an important role in shaping outcomes. When citizens understand risks, they can adapt behavior and demand accountability. When information is limited, rumors and fears spread more easily. Transparency builds trust, even in difficult circumstances. In water-stressed regions worldwide, successful management often involves public cooperation. Conservation measures work best when people believe they are fair and necessary. In Crimea, communication will be crucial. Authorities face the challenge of balancing reassurance with honesty. Understating the problem risks sudden shock later. Overstating it risks panic. Finding that balance is difficult, especially in politicized environments. Media coverage also matters. Sensationalism can distort understanding, while silence can obscure urgency. Responsible reporting focuses on data trends and practical implications. Ultimately, water crises test governance at every level. They reveal strengths and weaknesses that might otherwise remain hidden. For observers, Crimea offers a clear lesson. Control of territory is meaningless without control of resources. As pressure builds, the true cost of neglect becomes visible. Whether this moment becomes a turning point or a warning ignored will depend on decisions still unfolding. In conclusion, Crimea's approaching water crisis represents far more than an environmental problem. It intersects with humanitarian needs, military logistics, political legitimacy, and international stability. The idea of zero-day captures this convergence in a single phrase. It warns of a threshold beyond which normal systems no longer function. For millions of people, water security defines quality of life and basic dignity. For leaders, it defines credibility and control. As climate pressure increases globally, similar challenges will emerge elsewhere. Crimea is not unique, but it is highly visible. That visibility amplifies consequences. The situation remains fluid, and outcomes are not predetermined. Early action can still reduce harm, while delay increases cost. Understanding the issue is the first step toward meaningful response. This is why discussions like this matter. Water may be silent, but its absence is loud. It shapes history quietly, relentlessly. As this story develops, its lessons will resonate far beyond the peninsula. If you found this analysis valuable, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us continue breaking down complex global issues clearly and responsibly.